I didn't plan to lose my virginity to the man who fixed my ceiling, but maybe that's how life works. The slow drip, drip of a leaky pipe, and the things you think you can hold together on your own, until one night, everything gives way. It started on a Thursday, the kind of Thursday that smells like burnt coffee and dust. I'd just come home from my shift at the diner, my back sore from 12 hours on my feet. The apartment smelled damp, the kind of damp that gets into your bones and makes you wonder what you've done with your life. Then I heard it. Drip. I thought it was nothing at first. Maybe a faucet. Maybe the neighbor upstairs was running a bath. I kicked off my sneakers, set my keys on the counter, and walked into the living room. Drip. Right over the couch. One fat drop of water dangled from the ceiling, right where the plaster bubbled and sagged. Beneath it, a dark stain was spreading. I stared at it like maybe I could will it to stop. Like maybe, for once, life would just give me a break. Instead, drip. Another one. I dragged a mixing bowl from the kitchen and placed it under the leak. The sound of the drop hitting metal echoed through the apartment like a clock ticking down. I should have called maintenance. That's what any rational tenant would do. But when you've lived most of your life watching your mom get scolded for bothering people, when you've been raised on whispered apologies and hands that shake as they reach for the phone, calling for help doesn't come easy. So I grabbed a folding chair and a flashlight and tried to investigate myself. Bad idea. The flashlight died halfway through. The chair wobbled. I slipped and landed hard on my ankle, the metal bowl clanging beside me. I didn't cry. Not out loud. But something in me cracked open in that moment, and I felt 14 again. Back in the hospital waiting room, my hands pressed together while the nurse told me they'd done everything they could for my mom. Everything they could. Except fix what was broken. Back then, I'd learned to patch the world with duct tape and silence. No time for grief. Bills had to be paid. I was 17 when I signed the lease on this apartment. Just me and Mom's urn in a shoebox in the closet. I told myself I'd make it work. I had to. But now I was 20, alone, sore, and sitting on a damp carpet listening to the ceiling weep. That's when I heard the knock. 2 slow, deliberate taps. I froze. It was after 10 p.m. No one ever visited. My landlord didn't do surprise checks, and I didn't have friends close enough to just drop by. I opened the door with the chain still on. He was standing there in a gray t-shirt, work gloves in one hand, tool bag in the other. His eyes were tired but alert, the kind of blue that looks steel in the wrong light. "I heard a leak," he said. My voice came out sharper than I intended. "From where?" He nodded upward. "Unit 4, B, waters, seeping through the beams. I was doing a last-minute check and saw your number marked. You didn't call it in?" I hesitated. Didn't think it was that bad. His gaze flicked over my shoulder toward the bowl on the floor and the water stain crawling across my ceiling. He didn't say anything judgmental. Just, "I'll take a look." I wanted to say no. I didn't trust men in doorways at night. I didn't trust kindness when it showed up uninvited. But he didn't push past. He waited. So I opened the door. His name, I'd learn later, was Elliot. But that night, he was just a stranger in work boots, moving silently through my living room, setting up his ladder with practiced hands, murmuring about copper pipes and mold risk. And for some reason, I watched him, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Safe. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was drowning alone. And that, more than the leak, scared me. He worked in silence, mostly. The kind of silence that doesn't demand anything back. Just the clink of metal tools, the occasional grunt under breath, and the soft thud of boots shifting weight on the ladder. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, watching the shadow of him move against my stained ceiling. I told myself I was making sure he didn't steal anything. Truth was, I didn't want to be alone with the sound of dripping anymore. When he came down, he wiped his hands on a rag and spoke for the first time since entering. "It's worse than I thought," he said, nodding toward the ceiling. Your pipes are ancient. Patch job won't last long. I braced for the sales pitch. The mention of fees. A quiet reminder that I lived in a cheap unit in a neglected building. That help, even in its most basic form, came with cost. But instead he said, "I'll fix the rest tomorrow. No charge." I blinked. "Why?" He shrugged. "It's my building. I own it. You're a tenant." I stared at him. The man in dusty jeans and a gray shirt, with dirt under his fingernails and a tool belt slung over one shoulder. He didn't look like a millionaire. He looked like someone's older brother. Tired. Capable. A little out of place in my tiny, cluttered apartment. "You're the landlord?" I asked. "Yeah. Elliot Harding. I usually hire out repairs, but..." He glanced at the hole in the ceiling. "Some things need a personal touch." I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. In all my years of scraping rent together, I'd never met a landlord who cared about personal touch. They cared about checks clearing and quiet tenants who didn't make waves. And now this man, this owner, was offering free labor? To me? I felt my chest tighten. That old instinct rising. Don't owe anyone. Don't take what you can't pay back. "I'm good," I said, standing up quickly. "I mean, thank you, but I'll figure something out." His brow furrowed. "You can't leave it like this. Mold spreads fast. I'll call someone. You can't afford that." My jaw clenched. "Excuse me?" His tone didn't change. Still calm. Still maddeningly sure. "You're working double shifts at the diner. Your shoes have holes, and your groceries are store-brand instant soup. You think I don't notice my own tenants?" He wasn't cruel. That's what made it worse. He wasn't trying to embarrass me. He was stating facts. Quietly. Like it wasn't shameful to be seen in my struggle. But it was. To me. I stepped back, crossing my arms like armor. "So what is this then? Pity?" His eyes held mine. Unflinching. "Number its maintenance." Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. I hated that he saw me. Not just the girl with the leak, but the girl behind the leak. The girl who walked to work because she couldn't fix her car. The girl who kept the lights dim to save on electric. The girl who sometimes skipped dinner to make rent. I wanted to tell him to leave, to slam the door and pretend I didn't need anyone, but my ceiling still sagged. My ankle still throbbed. And deep inside, something, some fragile part of me, ached at the way he didn't look away. Elliot adjusted his tool bag like he'd already accepted my refusal. Then he said, "I don't expect anything in return. But if you change your mind, I'll be here." He left quietly. No pressure. No final glance back. Just the click of the door, and the echo of his words lingering in the air like the scent of old paint. I stood there for a long time after he'd gone, staring at the patch of ceiling he'd reinforced, the new pipe shining against the rot. A strange feeling bloomed in my chest, equal parts gratitude and fear, because I knew this wasn't just about a repair job. This was the beginning of something I didn't ask for, and I wasn't sure if I had the strength to stop it. I didn't go there to find him. I went because my sink wouldn't drain, and after 3 days of standing water and the smell of spoiled food scraps, I gave in and dragged myself to the building's maintenance office. It was early. The hallway lights still flickered from the overnight timers. I hugged my arms to my chest as I knocked on the door marked Operations, tenants only beyond this point. No one answered. I pushed it open. The first thing that hit me was the sound. Low hums from computers, the steady shuffle of work boots on concrete, distant echo of voices bouncing off high ceilings. The second was the smell. Metal, coffee, and the faint scent of motor oil. Familiar, oddly comforting. I stood awkwardly just inside the threshold, expecting a receptionist or someone to wave me off. Instead, a voice behind me said, "You're up early." I turned. Elliot was walking in from the side, sleeves rolled up, clipboard in one hand, a smudge of grease on his jaw. Not the polished version I'd seen during our last encounter. This was someone mid-task, mid-life. "What are you doing here?" I asked, more accusatory than intended. He smiled slightly. "I could ask you the same." "My kitchen sink's clogged," I muttered. "You didn't want help last time?" I crossed my arms. "I didn't know you ran a whole operation." Elliot stepped past me and placed the clipboard on a desk cluttered with blueprints, tenant reports, and something that looked suspiciously like an ancient toaster oven. "Technically, I don't run it. I just fund it, and check in, and occasionally fix things when people don't trust my team." I looked around. The place wasn't fancy. Old industrial lighting, desks scarred by years of use, whiteboards filled with scribbles and diagrams. Yet it pulsed with quiet movement, organized chaos held together by effort, not image. A younger man with a shaved head passed us, nodded respectfully to Elliot, and disappeared down the hall with a toolbox. "You were a contractor?" I asked before I could stop myself. He nodded. "Long time ago. Poured concrete, repaired HVACs, climbed roofs in snowstorms. Eventually, I got tired of working 12-hour shifts for someone else's paycheck." "And now you own this place?" "Among others." I let that sink in. The Elliot I saw now didn't match the mental file I'd created. He wasn't just some bored landlord throwing around pity favors. He'd built something, from labor, not luck. He caught my gaze, then, as if sensing the shift in my thoughts. "People think money changes you. It doesn't. It just amplifies who you were before." "And who were you?" He smiled without humor. "Hungry." The word hung between us, sharp and weighty. I shifted my stance. "Is this where I put in a work order?" Elliot reached behind him, grabbed a slip from the filing tray, and handed it to me. "Or you could just let me take a look." I hesitated. "You're afraid help comes with strings," he said, voice low. "I've learned it usually does." He leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "I'm not here to collect anything from you, Sarah. But I do know what it's like to live counting every quarter. And I remember what it felt like the first time someone helped without expecting a damn thing in return." Something in me twisted. Not pain, more like recognition. As if a forgotten part of me stirred at those words. Still, my voice came out clipped. "Thanks, but I'll stick with the form." He didn't argue, just nodded and gestured toward the drop box by the door. I slipped the paper in and turned to leave. But just before the door closed behind me, I heard him call out, almost casually, "If you ever want to see what the rest of this place looks like, you only have to ask." I didn't turn back. But I did pause. Just long enough to wonder why someone like him would leave the door open for someone like me. Don't like confined spaces. Not in that irrational panic button kind of way. But elevators always made me tense. Too many things you can't control. The doors, the timing, the other passengers, your own reflection. That night, the air felt heavier than usual. I had just picked up a few groceries and was heading back to my floor when the lights flickered once, then died completely. The elevator jolted, then stopped. No emergency lights, just black. I blinked into the darkness, heart already thudding as I reached for the panel. Nothing lit up. The button for my floor gave no response. The alarm didn't chime. Great. Then I heard it. A calm, annoyed sigh from the back corner. I was hoping to beat the outage. My heart skipped for an entirely different reason. "Elliot?" "Yeah, I'm here." We were stuck together. In the pitch-black box, with only the faint hum of backup generators somewhere far below, I could hear everything. The creak of his boot shifting weight, the rustle of fabric as he slid down to sit on the floor, my own breath, uneven. I stayed standing. "This happens often?" I asked, trying for casual. "Old wiring. City's been slow to update the grid. I usually avoid this elevator at night, but today's been long." There was a pause, and then something soft thumped near my feet. "Sit down before you fall over. That bag sounds heavy." I hesitated, then slowly lowered myself, keeping my back to the wall. My knees brushed something warm. "You're not cold?" he asked. A little. I heard movement, a zip, then something thick and warm landed across my shoulders. Here. I froze. Your coat? You're shivering. I wanted to argue, to throw the gesture back, but instead I tightened it around me. It smelled like cedar and faint traces of sawdust. Nothing artificial, nothing fancy, just real. Thanks, I murmured. For a while we sat in silence, just two silhouettes in a floating metal box, suspended above a city that hadn't cared much for either of us. You ever think the universe has a sense of humor? He said suddenly. I gave a dry laugh. Constantly. This building, you, me, this moment. What are the odds? I looked in his direction, though I couldn't see him. You think this is fate? I think. Sometimes people end up in the same broken place for a reason. That sentence. It didn't hit like a line. It hit like a confession. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My fingers were curled around the inside hem of his coat, gripping it tighter than I wanted to admit. In the dark, it was easier to feel things I didn't have to explain. A part of me wanted to lean in. Another wanted to bolt. I broke the silence first. When my mom died, I didn't turn on the lights in our apartment for a week. I didn't want to see the empty spaces. His voice softened. You don't have to talk about it. I know, but I want to. Another pause. I used to think silence meant I was safe, that if I didn't speak, I couldn't be hurt. But sitting here, with you, in all this quiet, it doesn't feel like safety. It feels like something's coming. He didn't move, but I heard the subtle shift in his breathing. I'm not your enemy, Sarah, he said gently. I know. Then why are you still afraid of me? Because you make me feel like I'm not broken, and I don't know who I am without the cracks. That admission surprised even me. But Elliot didn't rush in with comfort. He let it sit, let me sit with it. Then, after what felt like an hour, the elevator hummed again. Lights flickered, weak but present. We were moving. When the doors finally slid open, I stood quickly and stepped out. The coat still clutched around me. I turned, ready to hand it back. But he was just watching me. Not reaching, not pushing. I'll bring this back tomorrow, I said quietly. He nodded. Only if you want to. I walked away without looking back. But the line had been crossed, and for the first time in years I didn't feel like running. I'd had one of those days. You know the kind, when nothing's quite wrong, but everything feels off. My boss nitpicked every report. The air conditioning at work broke. I missed the last bus and walked home in shoes that had given up halfway. By the time I reached the apartment, my shirt clung to my skin and my patience was threadbare. I didn't expect to see him again. But as I reached for the keys, the door creaked open from the inside. Elliot. He was on his knees by the air conditioning unit, sleeves rolled up, jaw clenched as he fiddled with something inside the vent. I froze. What are you doing here? He didn't look up. Maintenance. The unit's leaking again. I didn't report it. I noticed it on the building logs. Figured you'd be too stubborn to say anything. His voice wasn't sharp, just tired. Like me. I dropped my bag by the couch. It's over 90 in here. You sure it's not just broken for good? He let out a low grunt. Maybe, but I fix things. It's what I do. I didn't answer. Just stood there watching the soft curve of his spine rise and fall with each breath. The fan in the corner pushed stale air in weak circles. The only light in the room came from a yellow bulb above the stove. Dull, flickering, casting long shadows on the wall. He finally stood, wiped his hands on a rag, and turned to face me. We didn't speak. Not a single word. He looked at me the way a man looks at rain after weeks of drought. Not with desperation, but with quiet hunger. And I knew. I didn't think. I didn't weigh pros or cons. There was no speech, no flirtation, no reaching for permission. I stepped toward him, and he didn't move back. His hands met my waist like they'd been there before. Mine curled into the fabric of his shirt. The heat between us wasn't new. It had been building, humming beneath every awkward silence, every sideways glance, every argument left unfinished. This was just the release. When he kissed me, it wasn't soft. It wasn't rough either. It was necessary. Like breathing. Like surrendering to gravity. We barely made it to the couch. The world outside didn't exist. Only sweat-slick skin, half-removed clothes, the low hum of the broken fan, and the thud of my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I didn't expect gentleness, but that's what I got. Not the kind that asks questions, the kind that answers the ones you didn't know you were asking. He didn't ask why I let him in, and I didn't ask what he wanted. We moved in silence, two people finding something honest in the only way we knew how. No candlelight, no music, just body heat, breath, and the soft rhythm of need. After, we didn't speak. He stayed a while, lying beside me on the couch, one arm beneath his head, the other brushing faint lines against my hip. Not possessive, not lingering, just there. Eventually, he stood, dressed, and without saying goodbye, let himself out. I lay there staring at the ceiling. The hum of the fan was still useless. The light above the stove kept flickering. Everything was the same, except me. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed, and told myself this meant nothing. But I already knew. I had crossed another line, and there was no going back. The first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was the silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that rings in your ears like something's missing, the kind that confirms. He's gone. The couch beneath me still held his warmth, faint but undeniable. My body ached in places I hadn't remembered existing. My legs were sore, my throat dry, my heart confused. I sat up, wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, and scanned the room. It was clean. Too clean. The leak was gone. The air conditioning hummed quietly, functional, smooth, like it had never been broken. The vents were sealed, the floor dry. Even the crooked kitchen cabinet door that had squeaked for months now hung straight, silently closed. I didn't ask him to fix these things, but he did. That's when I saw it. The breakfast tray, sitting neatly on the coffee table like a gesture that didn't know it was a wound. 2 slices of toast, still warm. Scrambled eggs, soft and fluffy. A small mug of coffee, the way I like it. Milk, no sugar. And beside the plate, a folded note. I didn't want to open it, but of course I did. His handwriting was simple, neat, unapologetic. Today, you don't have to pay for anything. E. I stared at it for a long time. Then I read it again. I wish he'd written something crude, something careless. I wish he'd vanished without a trace, without trying to make it feel like it mattered. But instead, he left comfort. Which made it worse, because now I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. I stood up too fast, the blanket slipping off my shoulders. The air conditioner chilled my bare skin. I wrapped my arms around myself, not from cold, but from the sudden sharp realization he'd been here, in my space, in my most vulnerable moment. And he didn't stay to ask how I felt about it. He didn't ask anything at all. He just decided, fixed what he thought was broken, and walked away. I didn't know if I should be grateful or furious. The toast sat there, softening in the rising heat. The eggs congealed. I didn't touch any of it. Instead, I threw the note in the trash. Not torn, just dropped. Like maybe if I didn't destroy it, it wouldn't mean anything. Like maybe it could be undone. But of course, nothing was undone. I spent the next hour cleaning, though there was nothing left to clean. I changed the couch cushions. I scrubbed the already clean kitchen. I wiped down every surface he might have touched. It wasn't about germs. It was about control. I had given him something last night. Something I told myself meant nothing. But now, he had given me something in return. And somehow, that made me feel cheaper than if he'd just walked away without a word. I didn't want to be the girl who traded herself for air conditioning and eggs. But wasn't I? My phone buzzed with a work email. I ignored it. The hum of the working vent filled the silence, steady, soft, like the breath of someone sleeping beside you. I hated it, because it meant he'd left a part of himself behind, and I didn't know if I was supposed to be grateful for that either. By the time the sun hit the window at its sharpest angle, I was dressed. Not for work, not for errands, just dressed. As if armor could be made out of denim and stiff collars, I left the breakfast tray untouched. I locked the door behind me, and for the first time in weeks, I avoided the elevator. The envelope was thick, heavier than a bill had any right to be. I'd almost thrown it away with the junk mail, wedged between a pizza flyer and a coupon for teeth whitening. But the return address caught my eye. Weston Properties Management. His company. I tore it open with my thumb. A single sheet of ivory paper slipped out, crisp and silent. It wasn't a bill. It was a receipt. Balance. $0, 0 cents notes. Full payment processed by third party. No future rent required for the next 6 months. I reread the line again, then a third time. The words didn't change. My skin went cold. I wasn't angry at first. I was numb. There's a strange kind of humiliation that comes when someone decides to help you without asking, especially when that someone has seen you naked. I grabbed my keys and didn't even change out of my hoodie. I marched straight across the courtyard, past the broken mailbox I'd reported 3 times, up the external stairwell to the top floor. His office wasn't locked. Of course it wasn't. He sat behind the desk, tapping away at a laptop like the man hadn't just turned my life into a quiet disaster. He looked up when I entered. No surprise on his face. Just calm. Like he'd been expecting me. "You paid my rent," I said flatly. He leaned back. "I did. Why?" "I had the means. You needed it. That's not a reason." His eyes didn't flinch. "It is for me." I stood there, arms folded, trying to remember the speech I'd rehearsed on the way over. Something about boundaries, dignity, maybe even self-respect. But the words dried up in my mouth. "Do you think I'm some project?" I finally asked. "Some charity case you fix while you play handyman?" He looked at me for a long time. His voice was low. "You think this was a game?" "No," I snapped. "I think it was a transaction." He winced, but not from guilt. From something harder. Like disgust, but at himself. Still, he said nothing. I waited. He didn't explain. Didn't offer apologies. Just sat there with the weight of silence thickening the air between us. "I don't need your help," I said, quieter now. "Then tear it up," he replied. "Pay it anyway. I'm not stopping you." That made me flinch. Because he was right. But I wouldn't. Not now. Not like this. And he knew it. I hated how well he knew it. "I'm not her," I blurted before I could stop myself. His brows furrowed. "Who?" "My mother." I hadn't said her name out loud in years, but her shadow lived in every corner of my memory. Silk dresses, heavy perfume, money that came in envelopes and favors, men who stayed too long or not long enough. She used to get paid to smile, to act like she was in love for a night, sometimes for longer. I swore I'd never be like that. His expression softened, but I didn't want pity. I took a breath. "When you left that food, and now this rent, I don't know if you think you're being kind, but to me, it just feels like I've been bought." He stood slowly, and for a second, I thought he might say something. Anything, to pull me out of the storm I was spinning in. Instead, he walked to the window, back turned. "I don't owe you an explanation," he said finally. That broke something in me. A thin crack I'd been holding shut with spit and pride. I walked out. No slamming, no tears. Just footsteps and a door that clicked gently behind me, like it had done this before. That night, I couldn't sleep. The receipt sat untouched on my counter, like a guilty thing. My mother's name kept ringing in my ears, and the way I had spit it out in front of Elliot made me feel like I was 13 again. Scrubbing dishes while she whispered to someone in the next room, heels kicked off by the front door, her lipstick half worn. I opened a bottle of cheap wine, poured it into the only clean glass I had left, then sat on the floor and pulled down the box I hadn't touched since the funeral. It was labeled "Don't Need" in my handwriting. I'd meant to throw it away. I didn't. Not really out of sentiment. More like avoidance. Inside were yellowed notebooks, a pair of her old sunglasses, a tin that used to hold sewing needles but now held receipts from liquor stores and beauty salons. At the very bottom was a folder I didn't remember packing. No label. Just a thick file of papers, clamped shut by a rusting clip. I opened it, and that's when I saw it. A letter. It was written in my mother's handwriting, but neater than usual, almost formal, like she was trying to be someone else. To the man who never asked for anything, I'm sorry I left without goodbye. You were the first to see me without the makeup, without the game. I was terrified of that. Terrified of becoming real. And you deserved someone real. Not someone like me. There were other pages, not love letters, more like reflections. Journal entries she must have typed up and printed. She never spoke about writing anything serious. But here it was. Paragraphs describing a man she had once lived near. Not a client. Not a lover. Just a man who kept fixing things for her. Fixing faucets, fixing the heat, fixing her car when it broke down in the cold. But she never mentioned his name. Only, the man with the hands that could mend anything but a woman's shame. My stomach dropped. Could it be? Number Elliot would have been too young. Unless he knew her when he was a teenager, or unless he was that man. I laughed bitterly. I was spiraling, stretching, hoping for some kind of poetic logic to this mess I was in. But what unsettled me more wasn't the possibility that he had known her. It was that maybe he remembered me, the girl with the scraped knees and too quiet voice, the one who watched from the stairwell as her mother flirted with strangers and called them baby, like she meant it. What if I'd met him before? What if he'd seen me back then? I couldn't shake it. And suddenly, Elliot's silence, the receipt, the breakfast, the way he didn't defend himself, it all felt different. Not like power, but like guilt. Or worse, regret. I placed the folder down gently. Outside, the building creaked in the wind. The pipes rattled like bones. And I thought, for the first time, what if I've been wrong about him? Since the very beginning. I didn't leave a note. I just left. I packed what I could carry and locked the door to that apartment like it had never been mine. The drip was gone. The walls were fixed. The air conditioner no longer wheezed like it was dying. Everything worked now. But I didn't. I found a listing taped to the window of a dusty repair shop 3 blocks from the freeway. Helper wanted. No experience necessary. The sign looked like it had been there since the 90s. The E in helper was drawn backward in red ink. Stepped inside. The man behind the counter was in his 60s, wore oil-stained jeans and a wedding ring so worn it had no shine left. His name was Walter. I'll mop, clean, take notes, whatever you need, I told him. He looked me over, frowned. You ever used a refrigerant gauge? No. Ever recharged a condenser? No. You afraid of rats? Yes. He snorted. Good. Means you're honest. Show up on time Monday. That was it. That was my interview. The first few days I didn't sleep much. I had found a room above a pawn shop where the shower didn't drain, and the toilet ran like it had somewhere better to be. But the silence was mine. There were no fancy breakfasts. No soft notes written in someone else's hand. Just the hum of broken fans, the smell of copper and rust, and Walter yelling "Lefty Lucy" every time I grabbed a wrench. I was terrible at it. I dropped screws into vents. I misread pressure gauges. I over-tightened pipes, but at the end of each day I had bruises on my palms and grime under my nails, and I felt like I had earned it. Walter didn't talk much, but one afternoon he handed me a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. "You ever think about why you're doing this?" he asked. "I want to prove something." "To who?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. To Elliot? To my mother? To the version of myself that still flinched when someone offered help? I didn't hear from him. Not that I expected to. Elliot wasn't the type to chase. He was the type to wait. But I wondered if he'd walked by my empty apartment. If he noticed the key I slid under the door. If he looked at the folder I left on the table with the letter inside, the one from my mother. I didn't leave a message. Only that. Let him make of it what he wanted. One night, Walter let me try my hand on a real service call. A single mom's AC had stopped working. Her kid was asleep on the couch, sweaty and flushed. I knelt by the unit and checked the capacitor. It was loose. I tightened it with a trembling hand. When the air kicked on, the woman gasped. "You fixed it?" "No," I said. "Just made it breathe again." She smiled. "Same thing, isn't it?" And that's when I knew. I didn't hate the work. I didn't hate the grime. I didn't even hate starting over. I hated that it had taken so long for me to believe I was allowed to fix something without owing someone for it. It came in a plain brown package. No name, no return address, just my name, written in thick blue ink, crooked and careful. I had just finished scraping out the gunk from a busted wall unit when Walter waved it at me like it might bite. "You expecting something?" I wasn't. The box was old. I could tell from the tape, yellowed and curling like it had been waiting years for this moment. My fingers hesitated over the edge before tearing it open. Inside was a worn red toolbox. I stared. I knew that toolbox. There was a scratch on the lid shaped like a crescent moon, from when my mother dropped it on a driveway during her 3rd week at an HVAC training program. She told me once, "Tools don't just fix things. They remind you that your hands have power." I had forgotten that. Underneath the rusted screwdriver set and the bent wrench was an envelope. My name wasn't on it, but Elliot's was. I froze. I should have waited, should have tossed it aside, should have respected that whatever it wasn't meant for me. But I didn't. I opened it. My mother's handwriting was shaky, but still hers. There was no date, just the words. Ink smudged and personal. "Elliot, if my daughter ever crosses your path, I beg you, don't let her think kindness always has a price. She will run, she will flinch. She's been raised to survive, not to receive. But there is more to her than that. She just doesn't know it yet. If you offer her help, do it without weight. She needs someone to show her that goodness doesn't always come with strings. And if she ever looks at you with suspicion, understand. It's not you she's doubting. It's me. I made her believe she had to earn every ounce of grace she ever got. Forgive her. Forgive me." I didn't know I was crying until the ink began to blur beneath my fingers. I folded the letter back like it was sacred, placed it inside the box, and sat in the corner of Walter's tiny repair room for what felt like an hour. It all made sense. Why Elliot had never explained himself, why he fixed my apartment, then left without a word. Why he didn't chase when I vanished. He wasn't trying to own me. He was honoring a promise. That night, I went back to my tiny rented room above the pawn shop. I pulled out the envelope and read it again. Slow this time. Line by line. Breath by breath. And I realized something I hadn't before. My mother didn't write that letter for Elliot. She wrote it for me. She just didn't know how to say it directly. Or maybe she knew I wouldn't listen unless it came from someone else's hands. The next morning, I brought the toolbox to work. Walter didn't say a word, just nodded when I set it beside his own. I used my mother's wrench to tighten the bolts on an old cooling unit. It squeaked less than mine, And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because something was fixed, but because something inside me had stopped breaking. I didn't plan on going back. I told myself I'd just drop the box off at the leasing office, maybe leave a note. Something vague, but polite. Something safe. But somehow, my feet kept moving. Past the bus stop. Past the old sandwich shop. Past the alley where Elliot once fixed a flickering streetlight himself, because the city wouldn't get around to it. And then I was standing in front of the building again. Same cracked sidewalk. Same buzzing entrance light. It had only been a few weeks. But it felt like a lifetime. The new concierge didn't recognize me, but he let me in when I gave my old apartment number and said I left something behind. I didn't know what I was looking for, until I saw it. At the end of the hall, across from the utility closet, was a door I'd never seen open. Ever. Even when the building was being renovated, even when the painters and plumbers came and went, that door stayed closed. But now, it was ajar. Just barely. My hand hesitated on the knob, the way it used to when I stood outside my mother's room, unsure if I'd be met with a smile or silence. Then I pushed. The room was dimly lit. Dust floated like memory in the shafts of light breaking through the old blinds, and in the center of it all was her. Not my mother in the flesh, but her work. A full-scale model of an HVAC system, complete with labeled ducts, copper tubing, even color-coded airflow paths, hand-painted signs, notes in the margins, tape holding faded yellow index cards against the plexiglass shell. I knew this design. I'd seen it once before. Years ago, in a magazine my mom had cut her name out of. She had poured her life into it. And here it was. Preserved, protected. I took a step forward. Then another. On the table beside the model was a plaque. Simple. Engraved with care. Prototype 04. Designed by M. Callahan. Dedicated to integrity, innovation, and the kind of woman who never needed permission to be brilliant. I sank into the chair in the corner, trembling. Elliot hadn't just known her. He'd believed in her. In a way I never understood while she was alive. There was a notebook on the shelf behind the model, her handwriting again. Diagrams, edits, personal notes about airflow and cost efficiency, scribbled in pencil and rewritten a dozen times. In the back, a sticky note barely clinging to the last page. One day, maybe Sarah will finish this. I pressed my hand to the cool table. She never told me. She never said I was part of the plan. The floor creaked behind me. I didn't have to look up. I didn't think you'd come back, Elliot said. His voice was softer than I remembered. Like the room itself had absorbed his sharpness. I wasn't planning to, I said quietly. But then, something found me. He nodded, slowly, not asking how, not needing to. You kept all this? I asked. All these years. I offered to buy it. She made me promise not to sell it. So I didn't. Why? She said it wasn't mine to sell. Said it belonged to the kind of future she hoped you'd choose for yourself. I looked at him then. Really looked. No hero's stance. No charming smirk. Just a man standing in a room full of someone else's legacy and treating it like gold. I thought about all the times I'd mistrusted him. The walls I built because of the shadows my mother left behind. The warmth I had felt, but didn't allow myself to want. Did she know what she meant to you? I asked. He was quiet. I don't think she ever believed she deserved to be remembered. I picked up the wrench on the side of the model. It fit in my palm like it belonged there. I think it's time I finish what she started, I said. Not to impress anyone, not to prove anything, just because I could. Elliot didn't smile, but his eyes did. I followed Elliot out of the old room in silence. We didn't speak as we moved down the narrow corridor. I could still smell the faint oil from the duct models, the years of quiet waiting between those walls. He led me to his office, Not the cold executive suite I imagined he'd have. It was more like a half-finished workshop. Papers everywhere, coffee stains on the desk, and a busted fan rattling in the corner. And in the center of it all, rolled up like it had been waiting for a decade, was a blueprint. He set it down gently, unrolled it, then stepped aside. "This," he said, "was your mother's last pitch. We were working on it together before she left." I stared at the drawing. It wasn't just lines and circuits. It was alive. She had sketched a full residential heating network, one powered entirely by rooftop solar panels, designed to store excess heat underground for colder months. It used reclaimed ducts, water circulation, and self-cleaning vent technology. It was ambitious, maybe even ahead of its time. But it was beautiful. "Why didn't you build it?" I asked, fingers grazing the edge of the paper. "I was going to," he said. "We'd already mapped out the pilot site in Nevada. She had even picked the contractor." But when she passed, he trailed off. Not dramatically. Just as if the rest didn't matter anymore. "I didn't think anyone would believe in it the way she did," he said finally. He looked at me then. And it wasn't the look of a man trying to convince me, it was the look of someone asking permission to hope again. "I didn't just hold on to it for her," he continued. "I was waiting for someone who understood what it meant." I sat down. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I felt called. "I used to hate how obsessed she was with duct angles," I said softly. "I thought she chose metal and airflow over me." "I think she believed the two weren't separate," he said. "That fixing what was broken, whether it was a pipe, a building, or a person, was the same kind of love." My chest ached with something I couldn't name. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was finally understanding her. Or maybe it was just time. "I want to build it," I said. "With you." Elliot didn't react right away. He just leaned forward, pulled open a drawer, and placed a folder on the table. Inside were old meeting notes, cost projections, engineering feedback, all annotated in both their handwritings. "I kept everything," he said. "But I didn't update anything. I wanted to, but I thought if I changed too much, I'd lose her." "You didn't," I whispered. "She's in every detail," I said, tracing a small diagram with her initials marked beside it. There was a silence between us. Not awkward, not unfinished, just full. Like the kind of silence you sit in when you realize you're not alone anymore. I folded the blueprint carefully, as if I were tucking her in. Then I looked Elliot in the eye. "We bring this to life," I said. "Not because we owe her, but because she believed it could matter. And because now," I smiled. "For the first time in what felt like years, I do too." He reached across the table. Not for my hand, but to pass me a pen. "Then let's start," he said. "With a name." I didn't move in with Elliot. Not this time. I didn't even spend the night. We left that blueprint on his desk, rolled tight and wrapped in possibility. I told him I needed time. Not to think. My mind was made up. But to choose how I would come back. I wanted it to be on my terms. 3 days later, I stood at his door again. This time, with a notebook in hand, a rough draft of the new energy model I'd worked on since our last meeting, and my mother's old wrench tucked under my arm like a totem. Elliot opened the door, surprised, but calm. "I thought maybe you changed your mind," he said. "I did," I replied. He raised an eyebrow. "I'm not coming back as your project," I said. "Or your girlfriend." He didn't flinch. He just listened. I took a breath. "I want to finish my technical training. No shortcuts, no handouts. I've already registered. It's 2 semesters. He nodded slowly. "And if I come back," I added, "I want to lead the design team. I want to be the one they look to when something goes wrong." "And when it goes right?" he asked. I didn't smile. Not yet. "When it goes right," I said, "they'll know it's because someone believed in the work, not just the woman behind it." He stepped aside and let me in. We didn't sit close. We sat across from each other like two people negotiating a contract. But it wasn't cold. It was honest. I didn't mean to make you feel like I was fixing your life, he said finally. I just didn't know how else to say thank you to your mother. She never wanted thanks, I said. She wanted a legacy. He looked at me then, not with pride, but with recognition. You are her legacy, he said. And that was when I knew we'd be fine. Not because everything was healed, but because he finally saw me as whole. I pulled out my notebook and opened to the first page. The rooftop heat sinks are outdated, I said, flipping through sketches. We can do better with adjustable reflectors. He leaned forward, already engaged. And the thermal storage chambers, he added. We never found a safe material that didn't corrode. I have a lead on a composite, I said. A professor at City Tech is willing to supervise if I sign up for her research track. He smiled. Not the charming kind, not the flirty kind. Just the kind of smile that says, I'm ready to follow your lead. Are we partners now? He asked. I looked down at my notes, then back up at him. We're something better, I said. We're builders. Of what? I paused. Of things that don't fall apart when one person walks away. That night, I went home to my own apartment. One I paid rent for, with money I earned. I didn't cry. I didn't feel small. I felt aligned. With the woman I wanted to be. With the mother I had misunderstood. And with the man who had somehow managed to show up without demanding anything in return. The next morning, I showed up earlier than expected. I didn't knock. I walked through the front gate of the complex like I belonged, because I did. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the sky had that soft blue tint that always reminded me of early childhood. Like the air hadn't yet decided who it would be today. Elliot was already outside, leaning against the stone railing, coffee in hand. No tie. No clipboard. Just him. In that quiet way he always occupied space. He looked at me, then at the old wrench sticking out of my bag. You're really doing this? He said. I am. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. A key. Not the kind you'd use for a front door, but one engraved, old and worn. The kind that opened an office. He handed it to me. This was your mother's, he said. Back when she helped design the first energy model. I kept it, locked away. Thought maybe I'd frame it someday. I took it, my fingers suddenly too still. She didn't need a frame, I whispered. No, he said. She needed someone to finish what she started. I looked at the key. It wasn't shiny. It wasn't new. But it felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. I wanted to say something profound, but all I could manage was, why now? He met my eyes. Because I finally get it. Get what? You don't need someone to lift you up. You just need space to stand on your own. I swallowed hard. He wasn't flattering me. He wasn't begging. He was just letting go, without leaving. And that somehow meant everything. I was angry, I admitted, voice low. That morning. After the night. I know, he said. I thought you were trying to own me, like she was once owned. He shook his head. I wasn't trying to own you, he said. I was trying to thank someone I'd never be able to thank directly. And I went too far. I nodded. I see that now. We stood in silence for a moment. Then he added softer. I invest in people. It's what I do. I raised an eyebrow. And you think I'm a good investment? He smiled, but there was no arrogance in it. I think you're the only one who didn't need saving. He stepped back, motioned to the small building by the maintenance shed. That's your new office. No one's used it in years. Needs cleaning. Wiring's old. Perfect, I said. We didn't hug. We didn't kiss. We didn't promise forever. But something passed between us. An understanding. A choice. Not of each other, but of what we could build together. Not romance. Respect. I turned to go, then stopped at the edge of the sidewalk. Elliot? He looked up. Thank you, I said. Not for what you fixed, but for what you let me fix myself. He nodded once. I walked to the little office, key in hand, heart steady. Not just my mother's daughter anymore. Not just a tenant, or a lost girl, or someone tried to save. I was the one holding the blueprint now. And this time, I was ready to use it. They introduced me as Sarah Vance, independent engineer and founder of the Solar Grid Initiative. It sounded official. It even felt a little surreal, hearing my name through the echo of that sleek hotel ballroom, in front of people wearing suits sharper than mine and holding resumes thicker than mine. But my palms didn't sweat. My knees didn't tremble. Because I wasn't here to impress anyone. I was here to honor something, someone, and to finally build. The click of the projector behind me was oddly comforting, like a heartbeat I'd learned to trust. I cleared my throat and began. Most of us think of heat as a luxury, a commodity, something that just shows up when we twist the dial. Laughter rippled softly through the crowd. That kind of nervous, polite laughter engineers give when they know it's true. But for people living in lower-income housing, especially in aging urban areas, heat is a negotiation between bills and meals, between comfort and survival. I turned, clicked the remote. A blueprint slid into view. Not just any blueprint, my mother's system. Upgraded. Alive. Inspired by the pioneering thermal loop model of the late Ruth Vance, I said, voice even. This project uses stored solar energy and shared load design to reduce heating costs by up to 70% for qualifying homes. I didn't rush. I didn't boast. I just told the truth. And the room listened. For once in my life, they really listened. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted him. Elliot. Back row. No name badge, no entourage. Just a man in a dark jacket, arms folded, watching quietly. Not a single person in that room knew who he was to me. They didn't need to. What he gave me wasn't a career, wasn't a project, wasn't even a second chance. It was a mirror, a chance to see myself. Not as someone broken or indebted or surviving, but as someone capable, as someone worthy. And once you see yourself like that, you can never go back. The Q&A flew by. I didn't stumble. I didn't hide. I held the blueprint up one last time. Change doesn't always start with money, I said. Sometimes it starts with someone who sees what others miss and chooses to build anyway. Some people clapped. Others looked down, thinking, that was enough for me. Afterward, people came up, some curious, some impressed, some skeptical. I shook hands, exchanged cards. When I finally slipped out the side exit, the air outside was cool, sharp, real. He was already there, leaning against the low stone wall, just like the first time I met him. You didn't mention me, he said, not accusing, just amused. I shrugged. Didn't need to? He smiled. Good. There was silence, the kind that doesn't beg to be filled. Then he asked, was it what you hoped? No, I said. It was more. I didn't hug him. He didn't reach for my hand. But we stood side by side, staring out at the streetlights blinking on. For the first time, I didn't feel like a tenant, or a project, or a daughter trying to redeem a mother's mistakes. I felt like someone who'd built something lasting, and he was just the man who left the door open. Tomorrow, I'd go back to the office, finish the prototype, prepare for grant applications. But tonight, I stood still, the blueprint still warm in my hand. And I let myself believe what he gave me after that night wasn't a gift to be repaid. It was a beginning. The plaque was heavier than I expected, not just in weight, but in everything it carried. A room full of applause swelled around me, but all I heard was the low hum of the air system overhead. Even after a full year of working, testing, revising, I still noticed the sound of heat moving through space. It had become a kind of music to me, the sound of comfort earned, not owed. I walked to the podium as the host read my name. Sarah Vance, recipient of the Urban Energy Innovation Award for her community-centered solar thermal initiative. People smiled. Some stood. Cameras clicked. But I was somewhere else. Back in a one-bedroom apartment, listening to water drip from a broken ceiling. Back to the weight of silence after a mother's last breath. Back to wondering if survival was the best I could ever hope for. Back to before. I adjusted the microphone, cleared my throat. No note cards. Just breathe. And memory. When my mother died, I began. I thought I'd lost everything. And for a while I was right. I lost direction. I lost faith. I lost the version of myself that still believed in kindness without a transaction attached. The room quieted. No one shuffled their papers, no one looked at their phones. But I didn't lose everything, I said. There was one thing left. I held up the plaque briefly, then lowered it. I still had the ability to feel temperature, not just in the room, but in people. Some in the crowd looked confused. Others leaned forward. I don't mean warmth like 72 degrees on a thermostat, I clarified, smiling faintly. I mean the warmth of someone handing you a wrench instead of a judgment. The warmth of silence that doesn't press you for answers. The kind of warmth that says, you can rebuild, and you don't have to do it alone. I paused, let the words settle. Machines can generate heat, systems can transfer it, but only trust can deliver it. There was a hush, like a shared breath being held. Trust, I've learned, is the real conductor. You can have all the right tools, all the right designs, but if you don't believe the person on the other end deserves warmth, it never gets there. I didn't cry, but I felt every word burn through me like sunrise through a frost-covered window. This trophy doesn't mark a finish line, I said. It marks the moment I finally stopped waiting for someone to prove I mattered. It marks the moment I chose to build. Not because I had to, but because I could. I looked toward the back. Elliot wasn't there tonight. He said he had another system inspection across town. But I think he just knew. This one was mine to stand through alone. And he trusted I could. I stepped down from the podium, my heels clicking softly against the polished wood floor. A few people reached out. Handshakes, congratulations, invitations. I accepted them all. Graciously. But I held the plaque close, because it wasn't just an award. It was a reminder that someone once saw a blueprint in a girl trying to fix her own AC, and chose to invest in her, not her problems. Later that night, I placed the plaque on my office shelf, next to something far more personal. A faded envelope. My mother's letter to Elliot. The one that simply said, "If my daughter meets you, please don't let her be afraid of kindness." She didn't need to worry. Eventually, I learned. And now, I teach. Not just how to install thermal grids, but how to spot warmth in people. The kind that can't be measured, but can change everything.